There are big questions in the labor market about trends in the unemployment rate and in the participation rate. And we were interested in this. I mean, this project started when we were at the Fed, where I was at the Fed. And so we started digging into why, and then we found something puzzling, which is there were fewer and fewer people who were joining the labor force, particularly in the second half of the 90s, which coincided with the big decline in unemployment that we saw during that time. And so, okay, so why were fewer people joining the labor force? So we tried to understand this. And then we exploited the CPS, so the household survey of the BLS, and it has a large array of questions, a very rich array of questions. And one of them, they precisely asked the question, well, are you interested in working or not? So we just exploited that question and we digged into it. And we found that precisely during that time, the second half of the 90s, there was a huge decline in the number of people who said they wanted to work. And so can we say something about what this means for the unemployment rate and the participation rate? Because what's interesting is that the people who say they want a job, they behave differently from the people who say they don't want a job. In particular, they're very likely to become unemployed in the future. They're very close to being unemployed to some extent. And so when you have fewer of those people who say they want a job, that's going to lower the unemployment rate. This effect is massive. I mean, half of the long-run decline in employment that we observed between 1980 and 2000 is due to the disappearance of those people who want a job that are outside of the labor force. And it's also very important for the low participation rate that we observe today because of this low desire to work. The first thing we did is to look a bit into subgroups to see, okay, what group had this decline in desire to work, people who want to work. And so we found that this decline in desire to work is primarily a prime-age female phenomenon, which means female between 25 and 55, a low-income phenomenon, typically people with children, and that the effect is strongest when you have children. So typically, this is a single mother, for instance. These are a group that has a very strong decline in desire to work. So now, of course, an explanation has to be found within this group, the people that are low income with children. And there was precisely one big change in the 90s that affected that group, which is the welfare reform. So the welfare reform voted by President Clinton in 96 made welfare a lot more stringent in terms of preparation for work, so going back to work. In fact, it was called the welfare to work reform. How is it that welfare reforms could have kicked away some of those single mothers out of the labor force? So that's a bit puzzling at first sight. But what we think may have happened is that the welfare reform was kind of a sink or swim experiment, in the sense that what did the welfare reform accomplish? Well, it made welfare a lot more stringent in terms of work requirement, meaning you had to find a job relatively quickly, within 2 years. You had to do job training. There was a lot more effort that was demanded on the welfare recipient. You also had time limits, meaning you could be kicked out after 5 years of welfare receipt. And what I could have done, this welfare reform, is to push, well, the strong welfare recipients, that pushed them into the labor force. They found a job. This is what people have observed. The participation rate, for instance, of single mothers has gone up. But then the weaker welfare recipient, that could have pushed them out because they could not find a job, or they didn't want to put that extra effort, or they didn't have the resources, strong barriers to employment, mental disability, things like this. And they may have been pushed out of welfare. Where did they go? How did they, in the sense that, how did they survive after that? Well, one possibility is that they went into disability insurance. In fact, we do also observe an increase in disability insurance at the same time as welfare goes down for these people.